Hi, everyone, and welcome to a Talk Insomnia episode where I'm super glad to have Trevor with us. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And for those of you who don't know Trevor, you can check out the Success Stories playlist where Trevor shares his own story, his own struggle with insomnia and how that ended. And you've also been here talking about mindfulness in general. And now, what prompted, I want to share with everyone a little bit about what prompted today's episode, which was actually, I was doing this drop-in class, which is like a group class in Zoom in the Sleep Coach School. And one of my clients there shared that she was actually working with you as well. So we have a shared client. And she said one thing that really helped her was seeing that even when she had like this sleepless night, she was tired, exhausted, not feeling well. She said, I could still kind of live out my values. And she said that was really helpful to her. And when I heard that, it really, like, something in me said, this is true. There's something very important here that I don't fully understand myself. I've never really explored this. So I'm going to talk to Trevor and see if he can come to the channel and talk about this. So thanks so much for coming on. And that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, no problem. In my therapy practice and as a sleep coach, I often use acceptance and commitment therapy, which has an emphasis on this notion of values and how do I live out my values even when life is hard and find meaning in the hardship of life through values. And so this is relevant to insomnia because it's important to be less attached to how you sleep. And when you can identify things that are even more important to you than sleep and lean into those things, it can just provide kind of a guiding compass for navigating the difficulties of going through a day feeling a lot of fatigue, even if, if you have a sense of what's worth going through this hardship for. So, what are values? I guess a definition might be what really matters to you in your life. They define what matter most to us, what we pay attention to and prioritize in our life, and how we measure our success and evaluate our worth and the worth of others. So, for example, like if I had a top value of physical beauty, then I would be evaluating my own worth and success of others differently than someone who had more of a top value of service to others or kindness. Depending on the values you're holding, you can interpret the world, the same kind of people, through radically different ways and find a different sense of meaning and a really different experience. So we're always acting out our values in this way, but it's important and worthwhile to take sort of an inventory of what do I really value, and maybe I've gotten away from some of the things I value in kind of the bustle of life. And when you can reorient to what matters most to you, kind of in the deepest place of your heart, then it provides a kind of a guiding light through difficulty.
And Trevor, I want to ask something here before we continue our discussion, which is, I had this, and I think I had kind of like, I hadn't really understood this completely. So my initial idea was that I thought that values meant almost like, here are like the 20 common like core values that people have, and now your job, so to speak, is to pick the two that are most important to you, and those values would be like kindness, empathy, things like. But I understand that it's actually much more flexible than that. Many more things can be valued to you. Am I right?
Yeah, and I think it's common and maybe kind of a shortcut to think of like these, fundamental top qualities of being and pick the ones that mean the most to you. But I appreciate in understanding this, in the nuance of this, a broader definition that says values are anything that we orient our life around. And I think that I'll get into why that's useful later, but there are certain things that we orient our life around that end up leading to a lot of frustration and perhaps kind of spinning our wheels, always seeking more. And there's certain things we can orient our life around in terms of values that lead to a more fulfilling existence on a day-to-day level. And that's why I think this broader definition is helpful. Because if you just say, okay, well, I care about being kind and this thing, there might actually be a lot of other things that you're still caring about that don't really fit into those categories, and it can be hard to reconcile the the different things. So I like this broader definition.
Absolutely. And not to stay on this topic too long, but can you give an example of maybe like a sort of a more narrow value than sort of like the broad, like let's say kindness is important to me, but can you give example of something more that is more kind of specific or narrow that I may not think about?
Like someone could value having $5 million, right? And they're measuring their success in life based on if they've reached that milestone or not. So, I mean, concrete goals can be things that people place a lot of value in.
And generally speaking, do you find that it may be tricky when you have a concrete goal, or it can be just fine to have a concrete goal? That's not a problem by itself.
Concrete goals are good, but they have limitations, and we'll get into that. I've got that in mind a little bit later in our outline here.
Very good, very good. So I'll just say the next thing that I wrote down as on the kind of outline that you sketched was this one: why are values helpful?
Yeah. So I think that our society, at least this Western society that we live in, oftentimes pushes a narrative through advertising and just cultural narratives, social media, that life should be easy, life should be good, we should be thriving all the time. And I think it sets us up for a lot of discontentment because there's no room to experience emotional difficulty or the inevitable hardships, losses, and adversities that happen in life. And I'm reminded of the fact that adversity and suffering is a part of life that's inescapable. In my own life, I'm reminded of that all the time. And in the lives of my therapy clients, I'm reminded of that all the time. This is not an easy life, being a human. And I think if we can remember that, and we can bring an attitude of acceptance when we're suffering, and rather than fighting our feelings and pathologizing ourselves for experiencing difficulty or difficult emotions, we can pause and instead orient ourselves towards what can make life meaningful, even though this is the reality right now, rather than trying to fight the reality itself. And this is where values can be just a way to orient yourself through suffering that's so much more helpful than fighting the suffering itself.
Exactly. So if I sort of reframe that and see if I got this part right, we all will experience suffering. For example, like maybe the most common form on this channel is like having experiencing the emotion that we call anxiety, being anxious, right? That's a form of suffering. It's not pleasant at all. And so instead of, going sort of the almost intuitive route of like, this doesn't feel good, I don't want to feel this way, then you can be sort of present there and say, okay, I do feel this way and I'm not going to fight that, but there's this value that I can still exercise and live out even in this moment of suffering, something like that.
That's right. Yeah. A metaphor that I like to use to illuminate this is, let's say that you set sail on a little sailing ship and you set off across the ocean and you're going towards this destination that's really important to you. And somewhere out on the open ocean, a huge storm rolls in and there's waves crashing against your boat and there's thunder and pelting rain and this wind that's just roaring in your face. You have a couple options there. One, you could shake your fist at the storm and scream at it to go away, that it's not fair that it's here. Or you could retreat to your cabin and just hunker down while this storm blows your ship way off course. Or there's this third option to really face the storm and put your rudder down and steer through this difficulty using that important destination as a kind of a guiding light to navigate this storm of life that is blowing through. And insomnia is one of these great storms of life that blows through for people. And so it's helpful, rather than putting all your focus on insomnia, to have a sense of purpose that is greater than the discomfort and even agony of insomnia at times, between the fatigue, the anxiety, the obsessive thinking that can result from that not being able to sleep. So yeah, if we tie this to the struggle of insomnia in particular, I think both of us talk a lot about the importance of becoming less attached to how you're sleeping and caring a little bit less, so you're not so caught in the cycle of anxiety. And the people I work with who have insomnia, oftentimes they know all the information. They know that theoretically it would be good to stop caring, but it's really hard to stop caring. And so if you find yourself in that position, it might be helpful to say, well, I don't need to maybe entirely stop caring, but what if I could also care about something even greater than this, something that could put this into perspective? And if you can identify and keep in mind values that are just very deep to you, in spite of the suffering and challenge that comes with insomnia, it can just provide a way through it, that can help you not just sit and ruminate and focus too much on insomnia in a way that's unhelpful.
Yeah, well said. So far, I think I've gotten a good understanding of everything we talked about, and then I think the next thing, then, if this is, if you think that this is the way we should go next, the next thing I wrote down was this one: getting in touch with your values.
Yeah. So there's a couple of questions that I'll ask that can just bring up what does really matter to you, and you might just take some time to think this through if you're listening. Maybe pause and just think some of these through, or write them down if it's helpful to you. The first question is just what's the most important thing in your life? What are the most important things? And then, what do you want your life to stand for? What qualities of being do you want to live out with your life? And finally, if at the end of your life, you were having a funeral, you had died, you had lived your whole life, and someone you really cared about was reflecting on the way that you lived your life, what would you want them to say about the way that you lived this life? That can be another question that can illuminate what really matters. What do I care about? What do I want my life to be about? And again, we're always living out our values on some level, but it's so easy in the course of life to become alienated from those things that really matter most to us. And so taking this time to consciously reflect on what do I really care about more than anything else, can help us reorient ourselves if we've lost touch with that. And it's also possible to even pick new values if it feels like our current compass for life isn't quite serving us the way we would like. It's possible to identify something we'd like to start making our life stand for.
That was really powerful. Like, as you were naming those, those ways of getting in touch with your values, I did it kind of like, let me try this on myself. And then we said, like, what's the most important thing in your life? Then the immediate thing that came to me is like, almost instinctively, it's like my family, like,
Yes.
My wife and 2 kids, right? Which I'm sure is very common. And then the second thing was like, what does your life stand for? That's a powerful question. Like, and I don't know, the first thing that came to mind was something like integrity, or something like you stood for something that was true. You spoke your truth. That's I think is a big one for myself. And then the whole, like, when you've passed away and you people are at your funeral, what do them say? I think I want them to say, like, Daniel, he was he wasn't afraid to speak his truth, or he's tried to help people in an honest way, something like that. But what I want to illustrate is, more than talking about it myself, is that I can see the power in this. I can see the power if you go there and find these values, that they can really, they are bigger than much of the struggle on a day-to-day basis, for sure.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're looking for some kind of inspiration around this, there's a lot of great lists of values that exist online that you might just scan through to see if there's certain ones that jump out to you that maybe you haven't fully considered, but a lot of them just arise from our intuition when we really give space for these questions to be thought through.
Cool. Wow. And okay, so the next one I wrote down here was this one: what types of values are most useful and rewarding?
Yeah,
and I think this is where you were alluding to this one before.
Yeah. This is really interesting to me, and I think, very valuable, because I've often found my own life being guided by maybe too strongly by values that aren't always fulfilling, and that I don't have a lot of control over sometimes. So there's a couple criteria I'm going to talk about here. The first one is a good, meaningful value that's really strong should be personally meaningful to you, rather than it's like a should. Like society says you should care about this. That's not going to carry you through like the dark night of the soul. A good value lights you up inside. It doesn't need to be justified so much. You just know that it matters to you. You just care about it just because. That's important, rather than, oh, well, they care about this, so I should probably care about this too. I should make that my value. And two, this is the one that I think is really important, that really strong values are immediate and controllable versus uncontrollable, out of your control, and future-based. So based on some outcome that may or may not happen in the future, but you're really hoping for. So let's talk about the latter of those. Why is that problematic, to be making our top values about something that's not in our control and that we hope to happen in the future? Well, one, if we can't control our value, like if I'm valuing as my top criteria for success in my life, having $5 million. If I am not there, or if the economy crashes, or I lose my job, and that's what the value I've been holding and aiming for, then I stand to be really frustrated, or feel like a failure, or feel hopeless, because the way I'm measuring my worth has slipped very far outside of my control, and maybe has, evaporated forever if I can't meet that external goal. So that's one. And I think if we place all our value on future goals, and this is something I've been guilty of, we miss out on the opportunity to live fully in the present and appreciate the journey, because we're saying, well, I'll be happy, my life will be meaningful as soon as I have, that house or that car or that partner, or as soon as I reach this thing in the future. And so it's so common to put so much emphasis on some happiness or fulfillment we'll feel in the future, and miss out on our life in the present. And there's this idea in psychology called the hedonic treadmill, which describes this idea of always, working towards some happiness in the future. But when we get it, we experience a spike in novelty and happiness for a while. But then we come back to our baseline, and then we find the next thing that we kind of loan out our happiness to, or our fulfillment, and then seek that thing. And we can just end up being on this treadmill of always seeking more, always seeking what, some point in the future where we think we'll feel really good finally. And often we never arrive. So goals, I'm talking a lot about when someone's top value is an external goal. I really love goals. I think they're quite helpful. But if we're not living out values that also give us a sense of meaning and fulfillment on a day-to-day basis, then we stand to miss a lot of the journey, and might make ourselves quite miserable, especially if our goal never manifests, or we experience a big setback in it.
Yeah, very well spoken. And a couple of things that I think could be really meaningful to talk about here. First of all, is there an easy way to tell a goal from a value?
So a way that I think about it is we can value certain goals, but we can also value things that aren't goals, like qualities of being. I think my broad definition of value is just the things that we make important to us. And if we are only making external goals important to us, I mean, I seriously love goals, and I think they're great. But if we're only seeking goals, and we're only finding value in goals, then it can be problematic. So,
yes, I think I get it. Like, you can have you can have a goal that you it's not really a value to you. You have a goal, but it doesn't really mean that much to you, whether you get that goal or not. It really doesn't matter. You're kind of completely untouched to that. So it's really nothing of a value. But then you can have this other goal, which becomes a value to you. You look at it as a value, and that can be problematic, but it doesn't have to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And the next thing I'll talk about will also put that into perspective, in that, okay, if placing our top value on external goals that we can't control and we may be disappointed in the pursuit of is a recipe for maybe not living the best life, then immediate goals that we have control over are much better. And so these are qualities of being and actions that we can take in the present moment on a day-to-day basis that bring a sense of meaning and fulfillment into our life. So for example, like, you value family, Daniel, so a quality of being that you could place a lot of value on would be maybe being a good parent, which is something that you can access at any time you're around your family. It's this kind of a guiding value that informs a lot of how you show up, how you respond, what you say, and it leads to a sense of fulfillment in the present moment when you can live out that value. And other values can be, I just wrote down a couple here: learning or listening, honesty, humor, integrity, kindness, compassion, being loving, patience, being hardworking, responsibility, rationality, simplicity, humility, courage. I love that one. Thoroughness, spirituality, health, nonviolence. This is just a couple, and there's countless of these values that you can tune into in the present moment. And that what's special about these values is that, unlike an external goal that you check off and are done with, these qualities of being values that are immediate and always within your control, whether you choose to act on them or not, they're sort of an inexhaustible source of meaning in your life, because you're never done with them. You're never done being a good parent. If you do it one day, you still have the option to do it the next. And if it really lights you up to be a good parent, then each day you have the opportunity to derive meaning from living that out. If it means a lot to you to learn and to be curious about the world, then that's always available to you to act on and to feel the fulfillment of when your actions align with that inner value around this.
Yes. No, I see. I see it. You said, what can you say that again? You said it's an inexhaustible source of value. Of meaning, exactly. Inexhaustible. Yeah. So no matter where you're at, no matter kind of what storm you're in, that you can have that within you. That's super powerful. And I wanted to, go back to a little bit what you said before. I think there's somewhere things that could be really helpful to talk about. One is that, you said that sometimes people choose values because we kind of like, we think we should think in that way. And that could be something, I'm guessing, like, a value for me is, helping save the orangutan, right? It's something like that. It's kind of silly, right? But we think that being a person who's concerned about the endangered species, for example, that's something we think as society that should we should think of that as a value, and maybe some of us really do, and then that may be a helpful value. But for some people, it may be kind of we take that upon us because we think we should feel that way, and that can, I guess, create some friction because it's not entirely true that we kind of try to make ourselves have that, something like that. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, there are things that each of us as individuals just have greater propensities for and just inherently care more about. Like, I really love being a therapist and working with people one-on-one. It just really means a lot to me. And so that's where I try to make a difference in the world more than, I don't know, by starting, by working in some company that's cleaning up the ocean or something. That's just, that's not where maybe I shine or I want to use my gifts in this life. even though I really believe in that, and maybe my friend is doing that and says, you got to do this. This matters more than anything. But I also just have to honor what really matters to me.
100%. And now on a different one, and this is where I can sense that maybe a lot of people have goals that are sort of become values, really, which is something like peace of mind, something like that, or feeling happy, maybe feeling something like that, which is really, I think a lot of people do that, and that's really tricky because, again, to me, it's like you don't have control over that. But do you find often that people choose that type of goal as a value, something like that?
I would say it's problematic to choose a feeling state as your value, or always being positive, for example, because you can miss out on some of the truth of the world and the truth of your experience. So yeah, I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that I think values find their sense of function when we can accept that life isn't always easy and that we're not always going to be happy. But how can we find meaning anyways? And I just really I think we have to deny a lot to always be happy or always be positive. And I don't really think that's healthy. I think we miss out on important things.
100%. So sorry to interrupt, Trevor, but I want to sneak this one in here because it's such a common question I get from clients. Is something like somebody says, how can I find that positive mindset, or why can't I be more optimistic, or something like, I'm sorry for being so pessimistic, or something like that, which I think then it has become sort of a goal or ideal state to again be in a certain emotional state, which leads to a lot of struggle.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, very well. And then next thing we wrote here, which we may have.
I just want
to sure, absolutely.
Say one more thing about goals. So if again, I love goals, and I think the best goals are those that can be informed by these present moment, immediate and controllable qualities of being. Like if I have a goal that's also reinforced by being a hard worker, which is maybe a more immediate and controllable state, then that ends up being a really good goal. I guess these immediate qualities of being values, they help us focus more on the process of living and how we're showing up on a day-to-day basis, which ends up, if we're really passionate about the process, it ends up leading naturally to positive outcomes and goals, as opposed to if we're just focusing on the goal and that's our sole measure for success. But if we find ways to find motivation and success on a day-to-day basis, that kind of snowballs over time and leads to positive outcomes, that's a great way to work towards goals that matter to us. But living as fully and with as much meaning on the journey, like the journey itself being full and meaningful, in addition to the destination being meaningful too.
Yeah, no, I think it totally makes total sense. And yes, let's.
And then one more criteria that's quick on what makes a good value. Sometimes, especially if you're going through a lot, it can be helpful we all have multiple values and they exist on a hierarchy, but it can be helpful to identify one or two values that are about more than just us, that kind of transcend our own sense of self. Because when we're really having a difficult time and we're in the midst of personal suffering, if we can tap into a sense of meaning that transcends ourself, like making a difference in the world, or being the best parent I can be, helping others in some powerful way, that ends up being a really deep sense of motivation and meaning that can help when we're really stuck in our own suffering. Yes,
and I can see the way I kind of heard that and saw that as really helpful was when you have a value that is sort of about yourself and you're in a place of a lot of suffering, then it can be hard to live out that value because it's about yourself, right? And you kind of feel like, oh, I can't even do this. But if it's not even about yourself, then you can kind of live that out, even if you're suffering yourself. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Very well.
Okay, now I'm ready to finally move on.
Good to the next one. Yeah. I wrote down this one. Values possession equals meaning.
Yeah. So values, thinking about values can be powerful. It can be moving. And it remains hypothetical if you only think about them. Once you identify what's important to you, for you to experience a felt sense of meaning from your values, you must act on them. If you don't, it's just a nice idea that can maybe make you feel good, but you really have to follow through in order to experience a sense of the sense of reward and mastery that comes with a commitment to follow through with the things that are most important to us. And I think this goes, this is relevant because I think a lot of people with insomnia, they'll sit around and they'll just think about their insomnia and how do I respond to this thought, and how do I manage this experience? And that can all be helpful until it's not, until you're just totally overconsumed by managing each moment of your insomnia and just giving it far too much attention. And I think when you can identify what's meaningful to you in spite of the suffering of insomnia, and you can take action towards it, then you can find a way to break out of the sort of analysis paralysis that can come from really focusing on insomnia and how do I deal with this and how do I get through this. Also, taking action, is emphasized in a lot of modern therapies because there's a lot of evidence to say that if you feel really stuck and you feel really poorly, then getting out and doing something, anything, can create more of a shift in your feeling state than just trying to think yourself out of that feeling state. Action can bring unexpected change.
100%. I totally believe that. Of course, seen it many times. But putting it in this context, like you did here, I think is really powerful because oftentimes, you feel really frustrated. You're, as you said, in analysis paralysis. You're thinking, and then sometimes somebody's like, "I'm just gonna do anything to just escape this," sort of like, right? And they do something random. Maybe it helps. Maybe it doesn't help. But if you put it in the context of like thinking about this as a value plus meaning, then I think it could there's meaning to it, right? Which really helps, right?
That's right.
So, okay, cool, very cool. And next one we wrote down, how values relate to mindfulness.
Yeah. So when you're stuck, when you're feeling really despairing or hopeless or just caught in that paralysis of thinking about insomnia, mindfulness, which is a big piece of acceptance and commitment therapy, which is how I orient myself often, is just a doorway to recognize what's going on, to have the presence of mind, to realize that I'm stuck in this sort of unhelpful place, and to recognize that I have a choice about how I respond to it. And if you have kind of the roadmap of values, and you have an idea of how you can act on those values, then when you can use mindfulness to find yourself in the present moment, stuck in some loop, perhaps, then you have the option to break out of it. So I think mindfulness relates to values by just opening up choice.
Yes.
In a consistent way that reminds us that we have a choice and can help take us out of the mindset of feeling victimized by the experience of insomnia, and make us come up against the fact that this is difficult, but we do have a lot of control if we're conscious over how we respond to what is right now. And there are ways to respond that can lead to a sense of empowerment and meaning that can put this discomfort of insomnia into perspective, and that can lessen the severity of how much I'm feeling weighed down by it.
Absolutely. That was I understood that one immediately, and I'm just kind of going to rephrase it for people who are tuning in here, because that kind of often helps. To me, when I hear that is, you're in this moment of, your eyes are red, you have a headache, you're like really wondering what's going on. You have all these what ifs going on. But if you have started to explore mindfulness, you can have a moment where you see it from the outside, almost like, wait a minute, I'm having all this suffering, but I could actually in this moment go and read a book, because my value is learning and the action is read this book. And that can really like shift where you are, and you can see that you have control of your response, etc., etc. So that was
That's right.
a reasonable
Great.
example.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that reading that book is going to be easy, but
Right.
it might be meaningful.
Yes. And even the fact that you just had that moment of clarity and you made that, it's super helpful. Okay, so the last one I wrote down here was, what in your life makes navigating the challenge of insomnia worth it?
Yeah. So I think there can be such a fixation on how do I get over my insomnia and how do I escape this situation, that it could be helpful. I mean, there's a lot that you can do to lessen the impact of insomnia on you, and there's lots of helpful skills and perspectives. But if you're just kind of stuck, it can be helpful to ask yourself, what if I asked, instead of how do I stop this suffering, what purpose can I lean into that makes the suffering worth it? What is worth experiencing this discomfort? Because it's that important to me. That can just give us, a sense of somewhere to go when we're really stuck and really feeling the weight of insomnia. And I also think that this is very relevant to insomnia, because if you can lean into meaning and you can experience that it's possible to find a greater sense of meaning, or feel enlivened even on a really tough day by living out what really matters to you, then you learn that just because you had a bad night, it doesn't mean that the next day needs to be defined by suffering. And that lowers the stakes, because it's less concerning if you had a day that was fulfilling, even though it was difficult. And if you come to believe that that's a possibility for you, then it lowers some of the performance anxiety around sleep. It lowers some of the pressure you put on yourself, because you know that there's a way for you to have some amount of control over how you show up the next day to live in a way that can be meaningful.
Yeah, 100%. And just like reflecting upon this in my own kind of like journey and teaching, etc., I think going back a year and a half ago or something like that, I focused very much on like, even if you had a night where you hardly slept, you can still have fun. You can do something you enjoy, which may be true, but that can be really difficult when you are in the state of lost suffering. So when you put it in the context of like, it may be not easy, not fun, not enjoyable, but it can have purpose, it can have meaning. I think that makes it a little bit easier, and it's still super helpful.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
So I mean, I always like to think that insomnia can be a real training ground for learning how to navigate adversity in life in a more skillful way, because there are so many. I mean, it's really intense to have insomnia, and it also provides the opportunity to learn a lot of ways to deal with discomfort and suffering, and to find strength and resilience within it, that once you do recover from insomnia, provides a reference for the rest of your life. And you can draw on what you learned about your own resilience and about how to navigate difficulty and intense thoughts and intense feelings, and how you kept going even when it was hard. And it's just really great training for the rest of life.
It's so amazing that you brought this up, because this is like the last week or 2 weeks, my mind has been exactly there. Meaning, you naturally think of being, let's say, therapist, coach, a doctor, whatever it is, that you're somebody who helps other people, right? As, okay, this person has this problem right now, and I can help this person not have that problem. That's great. That's good. That's helpful. That's meaningful. But what if you looked at it as something more? What if you look at it as, this person is in this state of suffering, and that's an opportunity. We can take this suffering and make it not only help this person arrive at a place where there's less suffering, but actually make this the key, the clue, the learning, kind of the great state of things we can learn from, that then leads to, not only does this person not suffer from insomnia anymore, but they can kind of like, expand what they learned to every aspect of life. So I'm in this mindset now of thinking of everyone who comes to me that has trouble sleeping, I'm be like, I'm excited because I think this can really help you much more than when it comes to sleep. That's kind of where my mind has been lately.
Yeah, it's a good.
Wow.
It helps keep my motivation up to do this work because,
right?
Yeah, it's an initiation into life.
And let me ask you this actually, because what happened to me was I saw that as I went from teaching pretty much traditional CBT-I, then understanding there were a lot of problems with that, and leaning more towards like ACT style thinking, mindfulness, etc. What I was almost surprised about happening was that people started saying like, "Wow, this changed my life." Like now, and then I was like, "Oh, okay, well, this is really cool." And so were you surprised in that sense when you got that feedback maybe from people, or you almost saw that from the beginning? Or
I think I saw from the beginning that what people learn when they're learning about acceptance and commitment therapy is so easily generalizable to the rest of life that I had a sense of that. But it's very rewarding when you hear that someone gained something, they got some gifts from the experience of insomnia and learning how to come through it. And it just, it really puts things in perspective too, when you have a period of your life, an episode of acute discomfort and acute suffering. It shows you what really matters, what's worth paying attention to and what's not.
100%. Wow. This is great. I just want to say, Trevor, thanks so much for joining. And like maybe a last thing here is, I'm going to write this down as I speak with you here, but you're, for people who want to maybe follow you or see what you're up to, they can Google your name, of course. And then is it liberatedsleep.com also?
Yeah. So I offer one-on-one coaching, mostly grounded in acceptance and commitment therapy over video. So you can check out my website, liberatedsleep.com. I also recently created a YouTube channel called Liberated Sleep. So I talk about some of these ideas more. And if you're curious, I'd love for you to check it out. You can just search for Liberated Sleep in the YouTube search bar.
I didn't know that. When did you start putting out YouTube videos?
2 months ago, something like that.
Wow, you should have told me. I would have been your first subscriber.
It's not too late.
All right, well that's awesome. I'm gonna follow that and just look forward to interacting more with you and just continue this exploration and the journey.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a fun conversation.
All right. Thanks, Karen. Thank you, Trevor.